Good morning, I'm Medha Basu, GovInsider's Deputy Editor. We're on the fourth and final day of the Festival of Innovation. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the session on scaling for a hyper-online world. How can nations build systems and structures to cope when so much more of our lives are online now? We'll be discussing this with fantastic speakers from across Singapore, across healthcare, courts, and culture. It's a pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Patty Chen. She's Product Manager of Tech-Enabled National Healthy Population at the Open Government Products Unit of Govtech, Singapore. Welcome, Dr. Patty.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Over to you.
How are you doing?
Not too bad.
Okay, let me just go into, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty going into full screen.
No problem. We can see your screen, so I think there's a, do you want to just go into presentation mode first and then share your screen again?
Sorry, I think there's some connectivity problem. Do you want me to go off backstage first and then we fix it? Because I can't seem to open up the screen at all.
Okay, sure. Perhaps while we help Dr. Patty with the slides, we can bring on our next speaker. Fantastic. We're going to do a bit of a switch over here, and we're going to hear first from Singapore's courts and how they've moved to virtual hearings. Please welcome To Yung Cheong, CIO of the State Courts in Singapore. Welcome, Yung Cheong.
Good morning, Medha. Thank you for having me here. My name is Yung Cheong, and I'm the District Judge and the Chief Information Officer and the Chief Data Officer of the State Courts. I'm maybe here 10 minutes earlier than expected, but I will endeavor to keep my presentation within 10 minutes. Thank you for inviting me to this session to talk about today's topic, which is scaling for hyper-online world. I think we don't need the slides yet. I'll let the presenter know when I need the slides, so we can keep the slides away first. Okay. We have a mix of speakers from the public and private sector in this session. I look forward to hearing different perspectives on the topic. Before I begin, I need to provide some context for participants who may not be that familiar with our legal system. There's some oversimplification because of the time limits, and I invite participants who want to learn more to visit our website to learn more about our legal system. Singapore's judicial system is made up of the Supreme Court, the State Courts, and the Family Justice Courts. I think it's okay, we don't need the slides. I'll let you know when I need the slides. And we serve the public in a number of ways, including hearing cases or lawsuits brought by one party against another. And the State Courts hears a variety of cases. But rather than list the types of cases we hear, I think it's always better to ask, what are the problems that our court users are trying to solve? And we approach it from that angle. So for the State Courts, we may have court users who are accused of a crime, court users who are making a monetary claim against another party for a variety of reasons, a court user who is seeking protection from harassment, a court user who has a dispute with an employer over salary or wrongful dismissal, and there may be a court user who has a grievance or problem with a neighbor because the neighbor's actions have affected his enjoyment of his property. So now we can look at the first slide, which is basically a user journey. My focus today is on the individual court user who wishes to make a claim against another party. And we're trying to show how we're going to try to scale this to allow online usage of our court services. And this slide summarizes a typical legal process for court users. First of all, the court user has to decide whether or not to file a claim in the first place. And the second step, the user will access our court services to file the claim, and then there will be pre-trial processes before the trial. And finally, after the pre-trial processes are over, there will be the trial or an alternative dispute resolution mechanism, which is employed to resolve or settle the dispute. Again, this is a simplification because, of course, ADR, dispute resolution, can always be started earlier. And this is finally followed by a decision in the case or settlement via ADR, and then this is followed by enforcement of the judgment if applicable. So can I have the slides maybe maximized again to show the two maroon boxes to show broadly the court's strategy in this area? The two maroon boxes, the one on the left, I think we're not maximizing it yet, but it shows that for pre-trial matters, we want to minimize the physical attendance of a court user by allowing users to use online platforms which are available 24/7 to transact their business. And these platforms are not just transactional platforms used for the filing of documents and the payment of court fees, but they are used to allow the user to get the information he needs. And we find that information is key, not just to tell the user what to do, what are the processes for filing, but to reassure the user who may be stressed and anxious. He may be a tourist, who wants to get a refund on an expensive but defective item. He may be an employee who feels he has been unfairly dismissed. So by addressing some of these underlying needs and providing the means to transact, we increase user satisfaction. Okay, next, I'm going to move to my next slide. Just give me a moment. Okay. And to illustrate the efforts at scaling our services for this hyper-online world, I'd like to refer to one of our online platforms, the Community Justice and Tribunal system. Usually, a presentation on the system takes at least anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, but I'm giving you today the 2-minute version. So at the risk of oversimplification, if you're a user who has a problem with a retailer about the iPhone you bought, or you're a user who has a problem with the neighbor, or you have a user who has a problem with your employer, this is the platform that you go to. Perhaps after reasonable efforts to settle the matter amicably have failed, because obviously we do not want the courts to be the place of the first resort when you are able to settle it among yourselves. The CJTS, which is an online platform, allows the user journey to start online, and in most cases remain online to the very end. The user has a variety of online tools as shown in the screenshot that he can access even before he files a claim, as we would like the user to make an informed decision whether he should begin legal proceedings in the first place. So the courts are not there not just to allow you to begin legal proceedings, but to help you make as much an informed decision as possible before you file your claim. And if a decision is made to file certain types of claims, we have introduced what we call asynchronous e-negotiation. And I'll just step back and let you know how the judiciary uses the term synchronous and asynchronous in case there's differences of usage. When we talk about a synchronous hearing, we're talking about hearing when all parties must be present at the same time, whether by virtual means or in physical presence. For an asynchronous hearing, we're talking about matters where parties do not have to appear at the same time. Instead, they may be able to file or upload their position into the platform, and time is given for the other party to respond, and so on and so forth until the resolution is reached. So we are introducing asynchronous negotiation to allow parties to log into CJTS to try to negotiate by themselves asynchronously in order to reach a settlement. And if that fails, a trained mediator can use the same platform and log on online to arrange an online mediation session with the parties to try again to come up with a settlement. And what we have found so far is that the rates are encouraging, and we are looking to ramp up the rates further in terms of settlement e-negotiations, in the sense that we have found that maybe a physical presence is not so required, and maybe the online platform is just as good as helping us reach settlements in these areas. And if the settlement is reached, the court orders can be issued again totally online, and there's no need for any visit to the court. So we have actually situations where users remain online throughout and never have to visit the physical courtroom. For problems involving employment and neighbors, there may be other opportunities to seek mediation from other bodies. So we're always happy also to encourage people to use other means of mediation, even though CJTS also provides a platform for doing so. And we are happy to work with our partners to try to encourage users to settle their disputes. Next, I'd like to talk about some areas that the courts are looking at which have a connection to this topic, which is scaling in a hyper-connected world. Basically, our data and user surveys suggest that we are performing our court functions well, and we are looking at moving a little upstream to engage the user earlier by providing self-help tools that enable a user to decide whether filing a claim is the best option for him. As I've mentioned earlier, provision of information early may also reduce the user's anxiety levels. So one area we're looking at is the area of motor accident claims and the provision of self-help for persons involved in motor accidents. We are developing a liability outcome simulator, which is a self-help tool that provides users with an indication of the likely apportionment of liability in a motor accident between two parties. And the user provides inputs to the system via a series of questions and answers and helps the system construct the scenario which will generate guidance on apportionment of liability. We're also developing an intelligent case retrieval system which allows users without legal training to obtain information about personal injury awards based on the nature of the injuries suffered. Currently, the nature of the injuries suffered affect the amount involved, but sometimes the information is not so easily accessible to those who are not legally trained. So the ICRS purpose is to make legal research more easily accessible to the layman or the public who is not technically legally trained. And these case systems are already currently under development, and some of them are even in pilot and testing. And finally, in response to COVID-19, we have introduced remote online hearings where parties log in via Zoom. If the numbers are small, existing tools may be sufficient, but as we scale the numbers, there's a need for a proper queue management system to manage both the physical queue, because I think we cannot get away from cases where we still have some cases where parties have to come to court, as well as the virtual queue where people are waiting in the Zoom waiting room for the hearing. And we've got to integrate this Zoom queue management system between not only the physical and virtual queue, but with platforms such as the CJTS, the case management system, so that users have a seamless experience. And that is key for us. To increase user satisfaction, we have to ensure that the process is seamless to them. We must avoid situations where users need to log into multiple systems. And finally, in a couple of last few minutes I have left, I'd like to close the presentation with some reflections on our efforts to scale remote and virtual hearings in light of COVID-19. While the world may be getting more and more online and connected every day, we must ensure that all users are able to access court services and that no one is left behind. Our Chief Justice Sundaresh Menon has spoken about 3 gaps that the court has to be aware of. First, the distance gap, which is the physical gap between users and the court. For some, it is an effort to go to the court due to the physical distance, and in addition, self-employed workers may have to forego their work, and others may need to take leave in order to come to court. Second is the resource gap, which refers to a concern that users may not access court services or other public services because of concerns about costs. So we have to ensure that the platform is a low-cost platform, and indeed it is. And finally, the literacy gap, which refers to a lack of awareness about one's legal rights and remedies, as well as digital literacy. That means how to use these online platforms in order to access court services. So when we scale our service, we must always listen to our users and be aware of these gaps so that we are able to address these gaps to allow all users to access our court services. And this is why it's important to understand the needs of all our users. And with this closing thought, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yung Cheong. Those were fantastic case studies. Thank you so much for sharing them. And I believe we've reconnected with Dr. Patty Chen. She's Product Manager of Tech-Enabled National Healthy Population at Open Government Products in Govtech, Singapore. Welcome back, Dr. Patty.
I'm
How
good.
are you doing?
Hopefully second time is a charm. Let's try this out again.
Fantastic.
All right. So good morning, everyone. My name is Patty. And today I'm going to talk about scaling for a hyper online world. A little bit about myself. I'm a public health doctor, and I'm also a product manager at Open Government Product. And so Open Government Product, we're a division under Government Technology Agency of Singapore. And our main mission is to proactively design, implement, and propagate new technology solutions to fix public sector problems. We have a in-house team of engineers, designers, and product managers who build technology for the public good. And we were founded as an experimental unit to exemplify what an agile, digital-first agency would look like. So before I get into the topic for today, and let's discuss why communication is important in time of crisis. So let's take a look at this, which is the United Nations report on embracing digital government during the pandemic and beyond. And what jumped out at us was this: reliable information from governments help people make informed decisions about their daily routines, build public trust, as well as enable public authorities to act decisively to flatten the curve. And Singapore, we were one of the first early adopters to include COVID-19 information portals across all of our government agencies. And OGP also helped many of the agencies put up websites so that citizens can see COVID-19 information. And another article that shows the importance of communication during a crisis is from Harvard Business Review. So even if you're trying to understand the extent of the problem, be honest and open to maintain credibility. Approach the situation with empathy. Put yourself in your constituents' shoes to understand their anxiety, so that sometimes you will get it right and you will often get it wrong, but it's still better to be as transparent as you can. And so that's where Postman comes in. So Postman is a tool for our government agencies to communicate with the citizens through multiple channels. We were launched during Hackathon 2020. Our team worked closely with Ministry of Communications and Informations to launch Gov.sg WhatsApp channel. It's a broadcast message that goes out to our citizens multiple days to update on the number of cases of COVID-19 and what are some precautions that they need to take from a citizen's perspective. In May, we decided to launch a modular version of communication channel. So that's postman.gov.sg. And I'll talk a little bit more about our experience of launching that product later on. Today, for the Gov.sg channels, we have over 1 million subscribers, and we send close to 3 million daily WhatsApp messages out to Singaporean citizens across the globe. So this was our collaboration with Ministry of Communication and Information. This is the primary tool for people to subscribe is through one of our other products called Form SG. So the citizens can put in their name, their information, and then even select the kind of language that they want to receive in terms of the messages that we send out. And this is our team that work closely with the MCI people to make this happen. If you want to find out a little more about Postman, you can go to our website and go through our guide. And our code is currently open source. So for people around the world that want to use our tool and be able to set it up yourself, we're always happy to help. The 3 primary channels that we provided for all of our government agency are as follows. So you have Telegram bot, that's our newest features, be able to send SMS and emails. And some of the core features that we have include having that multi-channel and do everything in one place, be able to send in bulk, so you're able to send to 20K, 30K in one shot in terms of one campaign. And lastly, the most and crucial part of it is the ability to be able to personalize your message. Instead of using the traditional tool to communicate during times of crisis, what we did was simplify the user flow through many of our user studies. So we talked to users, figuring out what are some of the pain points they have using mail merge and some of the SMS tools that they have. And from there, we came up with a really simple flow. So first, you will create a message on our platform, then you will upload a contact list, followed by sending the campaigns and then reviewing the campaign statistics. This is not something that you see commonly across communication platforms, especially for mail merge. You have no idea what happens to your campaign once you send it out. You have to manually collate the bounce emails as they come in. But we do that very simply by having a statistics area where you can download an Excel list of email addresses that were invalid or even SMS that failed to deliver. So then our agency users can then follow up by calling the recipient if something that's critical and if action is required. And recently, we also launched a new feature for information that are sensitive. So this is a password protected message feature that allows our agencies to send things like personal PIN or even test results out to the citizens with a peace of mind because all of our messages are end-to-end encrypted. And lastly, I'd like to end with some of the key metrics. So in order for you to scale in a hyper online world, you need to have digital presence, and that is mostly through communications. We have sent over 1 million successful messages across all channels, and currently we support over 90 agencies with greater than 750 users using Postman on a daily basis. And I'd like to end with something that is our hopes and dreams. I think what we're looking to work on is really having engagement with citizens and helping the government agencies develop their digital presence through communication channels. And one of the ways that we think we'd be able to have a wider reach is to have Telegram on board. So like Telegram is youth-friendly, and by having that channel open it up so that our government agencies can leverage that, we hope to engage more young Singaporeans to shape the future of how some of the policies and even find new ways to make things more meaningful in terms of the conversation we're currently having around COVID-19 and what it's going to look like after the crisis is over. So my name is Petty. If you have any questions about Postman, just drop us an email, and happy to answer any questions later on during the panel discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Petty, for those insights on how you scaled communications. Postman and many of your other tools are open source. Where can people go to find out more about the source code for your tools?
Our codes are on GitHub. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to find a link on the upper right-hand corner and then be able to see our code there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Petty. There's one technology that's been critical in allowing us to continue working through the pandemic, or indeed run this event. For more on this, we're bringing on Lim Mei An, Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Cloud Computing Association. Welcome, Mei An.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for being online. And yes, I actually come from the private sector, and I am not going to be speaking on behalf of the government or anywhere else. Welcome, I guess, to, I don't know how many months has it been, the 5th month of everybody and their dog pretending to be a Korean pop star because everybody's, all masked up and everything. I represent the Asia Cloud Computing Association, but I actually wear a couple of hats, and I'm going to share my screen right now just to show you where I sit in terms of who I speak for and where I represent, and why is it I will have the kind of opinions and perspectives that I will have when it comes to scaling for a hyper online world. Firstly, my primary job is with a research consultancy called TRPC. We focus very much on technology and economic policy, basically where the confluences are for technology policy as well as economic policy, how they can be driving things like innovation, digital transformation, etc. We don't really focus very much on Singapore because I think Singapore's public service is very, very well organized, and there's a lot of people who are right now on the panel who have been driving a lot of those digital strategies. So Singapore tends to be like poster child, top student when it comes to Infocom policy. So we don't really focus there. We focus a lot more on the developing nations. Some of the work that we're doing includes places like Myanmar and Papua New Guinea and Mongolia. So you can imagine that the spread of information, the spread of the perspectives that I will have and I will provide to you guys is really across these kind of places. So I know that Medha, thank you very much for introducing me as the Executive Director for the Asia Cloud Computing Association. We are an industry association representing cloud and technology companies. Over this circuit breaker period, I've also been very, very involved with a nonprofit called Engineering Good, where we focus very much on digital inclusion for all people using engineering solutions. And that's where I've been focused on collecting donated laptops and refurbishing them for for underprivileged children who need the laptops for home-based learning. So, if you have a laptop and you sort of, not really sure whether you can still use it or not, and hand it over to us, we'll repair it and we'll donate it to these kids who need it from home-based learning. I also lecture as a adjunct lecturer at the National University of Singapore. So some of my perspectives will come from both the academic as well as private sector perspectives that I gather from all of these experiences. So what's been happening in terms of the business sector when it comes to the changes that we've seen during COVID-19. I think that Take That had a pretty interesting song called Everything Changes. And honestly, I think that everything has changed for a lot of people. I think that we've all had to readjust, and I wouldn't belabor the point on this. I know that everybody has had to readjust. Some people have adjusted well, some people have not adjusted too well, but it's all pretty much still around the same. So the one thing that has stayed constant is, and this is a nod to another one of our panelists, John, who hails from Ireland, and he said that you can't show a Take That poster without showing a Boyzone poster. Well, but Boyzone didn't have a good song for me to be hinging on, but Ronan Keating does have a song called Life is a Roller Coaster, and indeed I think life has been a roller coaster for a whole bunch of us, and yet still some things still do stay the same. We do have to go to work, and we do have to try and keep the economy running. So what's been happening with cloud computing and cloud technologies during this time? Because what I've seen and what I've noticed is that everybody's been focusing very much on, oh my goodness, we have all of these contingency plans for all of these words that you see in this word cloud here: business continuity, we have disaster recovery, and we have all these plans and solutions, and we've got to make sure that we stave off recession, and there's debt, and we all have to do this stuff. But here's the really bizarre thing: with a pandemic like COVID-19, there isn't a tsunami. There isn't a big disaster that has happened that requires a bit of a emergency solution. In fact, it was like a slow rolling crisis that continues to evolve and roll out, and we're having to see and keep adjusting as we move on during this time of adjusting to COVID. We're having to continually adjust what we understand to be these resilience factors that we thought, and I need to qualify this, we thought we built into the system, but it's not quite there just yet. And let me show you the next slide, which is going to be a little bit heavy because there's a lot of text there. But we do have a lot of stuff that we had to deal with. So the first thing that the cloud computing guys had to deal with was this idea of the movement control orders. We had people who were countries say, okay, we can't have people moving from here to there because we need to halt the spread of the disease, and we need to stop people from spreading the disease. So therefore, no movement. But hold on, if you have no movement, who actually helps you maintain the data centers? So we had to move on very, very quickly to the next point, which was like, oh, we need to classify people as essential workers. We have to classify people as essential services. But who gets to be that classification? And that required a lot of sort of like back and forthing between the private sector and the government sector to negotiate that arrangement. And mind you, this is during a time, this is probably like March, April, where basically everybody was busy. Everybody was struggling with adjusting to working from home, and you couldn't couldn't call into the government hotlines to say, hey, we need a little bit of help. So we had to adjust to that, and that was a little bit of a stressful situation for all of us. for the cloud computing providers, I think that one thing which we really did not want to be was to be classified as critical information infrastructure, because there needed to be a difference between that classification, which was a cybersecurity policy classification for resilience, and this idea of essential services to keep the economy running. So we were very worried a little bit about that. And that took a little bit of doing, and that in order to help keep your internet on, and in order to make sure that we maintain the data centers that power your lives, we were really struggling with that. But thank God we got through it. And then it moved on very quickly to the third point, which is IP, internet protocol traffic management. And this is where it got a little bit hairy. And this is where I think it was very nice to see that the global players really took a little bit of that responsibility seriously. In the first instance, we saw the people who were providing entertainment, I guess less essential stuff like YouTube videos and like Netflix. These companies, Google as well as Netflix, they did immediately announce it, said, okay, we will not give high definition and deliver high definition quality TV to you in the first instance as a default. You can switch it on if you want to, but as a default, we will go down to just like regular resolution images. We won't serve you high definition TV in the first instance, so that we can help to spread out the demand. And that's number two, the demand that has moved from the demand for internet bandwidth from commercial to domestic, because everybody was now at home. Everybody was demanding for data to be parsed over the networks really quickly from domestic lines, which weren't actually built or configured for traffic management that would deal with that sort of thing. So we were having to adjust really quickly to those things as well. And mind you, a lot of these things are automated. There's a lot of AI and algorithms which are controlling traffic management. This is not censorship. This is really about like what's the best way to optimize. We divert traffic to the commercial side of things, and then during dinner peak period of 7 p.m. to like 9 p.m. you want to be diverting your bandwidth loads and supporting that load that comes with people just chilling out after dinner. And of course, obviously we'd have to deal with that, as well as the time zones, who wakes up when. We have to shift things over here, so that required a little bit of adjustment as well. And also, one learning point I felt that was interesting for a lot of people was this notion that a lot of people do what we call Wi-Fi offload, and you do it as well. When you get to a place, let's say your office, which does have Wi-Fi, you switch off your mobile data and then you move over to Wi-Fi. But in a lot of cases, a lot of people were stuck at home, and some people don't actually have Wi-Fi. They don't actually have a broadband connection at home, because they're like, most of the time I'm out at work or I'm out somewhere else. I'm very happy to just use mobile. But when they're stuck at home, a lot of people suddenly needed to, number one, switch on their internet connectivity, or they were primarily on the mobile devices, and that Wi-Fi offload didn't happen. And therefore, there was a little bit of adjustment that was needed from the telco side of things to actually support that as well. And that was, again, another learning point for all of us. And it was a pretty interesting thing to scale up for that hyper online world that everybody was living in, because for the cloud providers and telcos, everything shifted all at once. It's still in inverted commas, it's still the same stuff, because it's about people using data, but it was different because suddenly everything was coming, the demand was all coming in all at once. I'll end with one final point, which is the notion of this digital divide and universal service obligations. You'll see that in many countries, there is a digital divide that has been revealed during this time where everybody was just hyper online. It was the lack of devices. It was the lack of understanding of the devices. You guys know that when we give kids, especially the younger generation right now, if you give kids a mobile phone, it's almost intuitive the way that they can manage to go online and use the tools that are on the phone, and they can use the phone, and that's no problem. But what happens when you have teachers who need to teach children how to do their mathematical sums on a computer? Well, a lot of children who may have been able to do 1 hour or 2 hours of online learning via a mobile phone and slowly typing their solutions in, that completely got disrupted, because if you're needing to be online for the whole entire day, you would need other skills. You wouldn't be typing on a screen keyboard. You would need touch typing skills. You would need to know how to process words on a word processor. You would need to know how to do spreadsheets. You need to know how to do PowerPoint presentations, etc. So we're seeing a lot of those skills. In the first instance, a lot of kids don't have the devices. They don't have laptops. The second thing is that a lot of the kids don't actually have these skills, and that's something which I'm working on with my nonprofit organization, Engineering Good, to make sure that we actually, number one, get these kids the laptops that they need, and number two, are able to learn these skills that they need. So we're seeing a lot of new adjustments that need to be made from cloud providers and telcos as well as society during this hyper online world. And I really hope to hear from you if you've got suggestions or anything. I put my various emails down in the corner of the screen there, as well as my Twitter handle. So if you feel like you are inspired by this, please do reach out. Back to you, Medha.
Thank you, Mayan. That was fascinating on how companies have adapted to new demand during this pandemic. There's a huge amount of other tech as well that's enabling our new normal. How can agencies stay on top of it all? We'll hear more on this from SolarWinds. We've got John O'Callaghan, Director of International Product Marketing, and Mark Smith, Senior Federal Product Marketing Manager at SolarWinds. Over to you, John and Mark.
Thank you very much, Medha, and good morning to everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. Delighted to be here. So some very interesting discussions we've been hearing. There are a couple of things. One thing reminded me, so the state courts reminded me I've actually been called for jury selection at the end of the month, so it'd be interesting to see how we manage that here in Ireland. Yeah, so for those of you who are maybe not aware of SolarWinds, so we don't do solar and we don't do winds, that's the first thing. What we actually do is provide technology to organizations to be able to monitor all things within IT operations and so on. So one thing that struck me during the last conversation there is, if we can imagine a world without technology today. So if we didn't have mobile technology, if we didn't have Wi-Fi, the impact of this pandemic would be far greater, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about what we do in relation to helping organizations and governments to make sure that all of the essential components within the IT stack, through the applications, the databases, the infrastructure, the networks, all the things that need to work in harmony to make sure that users' experience is good, is maintained. So we'll go through that. And I love the words, you hear this, the word transformation being bandied about quite a lot, right? You hear digital transformation, IT transformation, business transformation, government transformation, or whatever. And essentially that's really just down to change, right? So Mark, if you want to jump on to the next slide there. So yeah, with the introductions, we can do that. So this one here is, you probably want to make that full screen, but I've been in IT for quite a long time in the technology industry since the 80s. And, obviously this pandemic has accelerated change in certain areas, right? But the IT landscape has always been changing. And, if you go back to that statement, imagining, the world without mobile technology and, iPhones and iPads and Android devices, it's really only since 2006 we've seen the advent of that, right? And change is driven through, businesses wanting to move and governments wanting to move from one state to another state. We want to be able to offer these services, etc. And we've seen that, that's driven through innovation in technology. So, back in the days in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, when everything was managed from a single box in the corner called the mainframe, and then revolutionary kind of change came along with things like the client-server business. So the organizations like Intel, Microsoft, Dell came along and changed how we do business. And then, of course, in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s, we saw the advent of virtualization and technology, which allowed people to even do more with the technology. And then, of course, we have cloud coming along and mobile technologies and global networks, etc. Right? So, change is kind of always part of what we do within IT. IT from the user perspective is probably getting a little bit easier. So we can now access applications from our mobile devices or iPads from any location in the world. We can obviously, we're lucky to have that technology available today, seeing as everybody's working from home for the most part, right? And that's there. But if we look at, things that we want to kind of achieve as we go forward. So if you want to move on to the next slide there, Mark, and we can go through it. So, some of the challenges we see with organizations in terms of digital performance is time and money, right? So it can cost IT teams a lot of time just managing performance of digital environments, and that associated time and cost is quite significant. And the reason for that, even though the user is finding it easier, behind the scenes, IT has actually got a lot more complex, right? Because it's no longer that single box in the corner that has to be working. There's many different facets of technology that has to work together to make sure that users get the best experience they can possibly get. And of course, we want to make sure we can help to address all of those challenges as well. Okay, let's move on to the next one there. So when we hear about outages and issues and challenges that people face, there's really three types of issues that can occur within any situation. So operational challenges, which might be discussed at the CIO level within organizations. A service is no longer working. So taking that court service earlier on that was discussed, if, for example, the network fails, or a database that's supporting that environment fails, or the application slows down, or the storage device fails, or whatever, then the users can't access those services. There's some operational issues. Teams might have to be diverted from certain tasks to fix other things. And that's the kind of minimum impact that you're going to see. Worst case scenario, you might get into kind of bigger service impacts, and in the private industry, you might have financial impacts. So you can imagine, like, if Amazon.com was down for a week, the impact that would have on their business, right? And then, of course, the most serious impact is the reputational impacts when things hit the news feeds and so on. Maybe a service is not available from some government, or some private business can't transact, or whatever. And that's the kind of most serious type of impact that you would have. So SolarWinds as an organization, we exist to try and we provide technology to organizations to try and avoid that and make sure that their operations are running smoothly. So they're kind of outlining the challenges that we've seen. What I'll do now is hand over to Mark. So Mark works within our federal government organization in the United States. He's going to bring us through some of the discussions around how we can actually help with that.
Great, and thanks, John. So right, digital transformation does, it involves adapting the technology to new ways, and that drives the process of innovation by connecting people with the data to make improved decisions. And I would also say, this is a journey with many steps, and that everyone has to start at a different starting point, and based upon the maturity level of the organization, where they are, and they need to proceed with the only 13% of the market is actually mature in the digital transformation. The rest of the market is in process or catching up. So there's definitely, everyone is in process, and everyone is involved in trying to and do this. So the reasons, the drivers behind digital transformation is really the customer experience. Probably the most important for the government side is because we need the constituents and the users have high expectations. They expect everything to work and for information to be quickly available, and there's a trend for like smart cities and things where the technology is enabling the users or the constituents, and it's expected, if you want to draw people to your city, that you have smart services, and your traffic lights know when they're broken, and things of that nature. Also, collaboration is an important factor for the government, especially in the times of COVID, but also just in general. If you think about like the U.S. government, when they give out grants within NIH, there's a grant review process, and there's specialists that are pulled in across the world to judge the merits of different grant applications, and they've got all these collaboration in the way they get their information and make their decisions is all tied in with these tools. And so when you look at the customer experience and you look at the technical aspects of what's involved, from SolarWinds' perspective, we look at the different levels of the stack, as John had mentioned, where you have to look at the application performance to understand the dependencies, the application performance, and the web and the back office applications. I mean, there's databases and all these different dependent things that if everything doesn't work well, that it doesn't perform to the expectation of the user. There's also data. I mean, the access to data, this brings in the security element. It's who has access, and what happens to the data when it's at rest and when it's in transit. And especially if some of the history of the US government is, if you give data to contractors and the contractors' systems aren't secure, then you can create security issues with your subcontractors. And then also when it comes to the technology available, you're moving to the cloud. We're also, as you move to the cloud, it reduces your visibility, and it reduces the amount of control you have over your servers and your applications, because you're paying someone to provide it for you as a service. And then also with network connectivity, I mean, this is the underlying infrastructure that drives all the users and all the data and everything. So you have to look at it all from kind of a holistic perspective. And then so what you do to improve your customer experience is to focus on delivering tools that help track. And so like with support, if you have to have the tools to track incidences and make sure things are resolved quickly, make sure you're efficiently following procedures, doing things, and tracking that it's done effectively, gathering data on what's broken and what needs to get fixed and things of that nature. And also a whole lot of education is involved in terms of the staff, in terms of the users, and making sure that people know how to resolve the problems and move things forward. So just breaking, John, you want to step in on this slide if you want, but this is basically the, as the customer experiences this kind of visualizes the chain of from the user to the network, how they access the applications with the mobile devices using the network, which in the end goes back to the database on the back end and connects into servers. And so, our philosophy is you have to monitor all the different data points on all the different dependent things within the chain in order to understand the relationships of what's going wrong when something needs to be troubleshooted.
Absolutely, and when you look at that from a holistic perspective, everything from that left-hand side to the right-hand side and back out again has to operate in harmony, right? And if anything breaks or slows down within that whole chain, which is why we call it the customer experience chain, because the weakest link, if something happens to something in that chain, then the customer is going to suffer a poor experience. So, organizations, be they public or private, they need the ability to be able to oversee all of that, and the ability to kind of understand, what has gone wrong, and not so much, what has gone wrong, but how fast they can actually resolve those issues. So you hear a lot about service management in relation to things like response times and resolution times and so on. So all of that has to be taken into account in relation to current technology. And two of the things, I suppose, that have been affected a lot in the current COVID situation, one is obviously remote. So a lot of companies and organizations have people working remotely. So things like access through VPN and that type of stuff, that needs to be monitored closely as well. And also things like, monitoring collaboration tool usage as well. So things like the Zoom, it was mentioned earlier on, Microsoft Teams, Google Slack, all these type of ones, which can put pressure on networks and so on. So there are certain elements that need a little bit more attention than usual in this particular world. Okay, so I know we're kind of up in terms of time in the presentation, so we can answer any questions that you have in the Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John and Mark. Thank you for joining us. I know it's 5 a.m. over in Ireland for you, John, so I hope you've got a cup of coffee next to you.
This event is being sponsored by Starbucks.
Fantastic. And we've got one other fantastic figure joining the panel discussion now. Please welcome.
Oh, I think that Medha has frozen a little bit, so perhaps Hardi, maybe you would like to just move ahead with your presentation.
Hey guys. Yeah, very good points that have been spoken by John and Mark. I think also coming from the heritage sector in Singapore, we actually had just gone through our digitalization transformation, and I have to resonate and also echo the points that yes, moving to the cloud is actually one very big important step, and having to make sure that having the right monitoring, the operations management, and also to make sure that we've got all the bases covered on security and such. it is actually very critical when you look at moving towards a very online world that we are today. And the reason being so is in the heritage sector, we typically were looking at museums and heritage institutions, right? You go to a museum, you come in on a physical, as a physical visitor, and when with COVID hitting, what happens is you start to stay at home. But what we had to do was we had to pivot the business to move towards looking at going to the digital realm. And you'll be surprised if you're in Singapore over the last few months, you've seen that we've just launched our Singapore Heritage Festival Digital Edition, where we use videos, live streaming, virtual walks and stuff like that online. And you find that you're right. I think coming from where Mayen was mentioned, the mobile phone is now the most important tool that you have in hand, right? Both as a person, in terms of if I'm actually a guide, I'm going to use it to stream some of this stuff across. And also if I'm actually a visitor or a participant, I actually stay at home and actually enjoy this content. And to do this, you have to do it safely. So I think coming from the performance management standpoint, for NHP, we've actually now started to invest a lot in terms of having end-to-end performance management, looking at making sure our systems are fully up in place, while at the same time also making it very seamless to the visitors who are both online, who are coming up through their phones and so on, to make sure that the data and also that the experience doesn't change. So one of the things we've done, just as a quick takeaway while we wait for Medha, is we've just launched a National Innovation Challenge. We're looking at building the next 5G platform to host our virtual environment. We did it through the Infocom Media Development Authority's Open Innovation Platform, which has been closed. And I think with this new, changes in the new post-COVID world order, I would call it, I think there's a lot of opportunities that both the CEO and CTO, who most probably have to take years to actually start to look at digitalization, it's actually going to be something that would be able to, for them to be able to fast track very quickly. Yeah. So at this stage, some of the things that we are looking at in terms of content, right? Maybe just to touch on the point for what Mark just mentioned, I think interestingly, you find that some of these tools within the government this environment, we tend to be very prudent in terms of some of the expenditures, in terms of investments for compliance. And I think what we can do is to look at in terms of how some of these investments can really pay off now, especially in this age. So Medha, back to you.
Thank you, Hardi. Thank you for telling us about what you've been up to over the last few months. That's very, very exciting. I know that John needs to hop off in just 5 minutes. So I wanted to just ask, what have been some of the innovations you've seen emerging from the pandemic?
So some of the innovations through the pandemic, we've certainly seen a lot of clients, and we've actually posted some of this stuff. We've got an online community, right? It's a very strange name, but it's very good. It's called THWACK, right? THWACK. And what we saw early on in the pandemic was our customers actually using our technology to display or to build out what they call crisis dashboards. Because they were suddenly posed with this challenge of everybody having to go to work from home. The IT teams are scrambling to get people with the technology available to do that. They had to obviously have capacity on their IP network and on their VPN tunnels to take care of all of those connections and so on. And that was a risk, of course, to a lot of companies. So the innovative customers that we have out there were using our tools to build out these crisis dashboards to be able to monitor how many people were logging on, how long they were logging on for, how much of the bandwidth was being utilized, and making sure that the bandwidth is being not overstressed as well. So that was one kind of key area that we saw as well. Other ones then, of course, in relation to things like security. So people, again, when you see a lot of people logging on from outside the office locations and so on, sometimes systems can raise that as security concerns. So making sure that was managed to make sure that they weren't getting false security alerts popping up due to the fact that 99% of their staff now had to connect in from outside the office as well. So just a couple of simple points. So if anybody on the call wants to jump on to our THWACK community, you can do that. Do a search for crisis dashboards. You see some good examples of what customers are doing in that space.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And Hardi, just coming back to you, what were some of the biggest challenges museums and heritage centers in Singapore have faced through this pandemic, and how are you using technology to tackle some of those? You talked about building some virtual platforms.
I guess over the next 12 months or so, we're going to see that the visitors numbers are still going to be quite low, especially with social distancing. So what we've done is to look at merging both the online and the virtual worlds together. We're looking at building digital twins, just like the game Second Life, for some of you guys who have played it before, so that we can extend the same experience that you get within the physical space online, and to also give opportunities for folks within the industry. I think there's a lot of people in the gig economy, small, medium-sized enterprises who are, I think, affected by the business, and we think that this is a good way for them to be able to contribute, and especially for content and also business opportunities within the heritage sector.
Fantastic. And Dr. Petty, just going back to you, you talked about how you scaled up communications delivery during the pandemic at a very early stage. Why was it so crucial at that point to speed up the delivery of these messages and communications?
I think most citizens, they feel very anxious when they don't really know what's going on. Some of the feedback we have gotten from agency users is that when they talk to parents, they get anxious when they're not sure what the school is going to do. And Ministry of Health had overwhelming responses coming from the citizens through call lines, through emails asking about what are some of the measures that they have to take, and being transparent help alleviate a lot of these anxiety and help people do the social distancing measures, help people wear masks. So those are really important to fight the pandemic early on.
Fantastic, thank you. And Mayan, you talked about the role that the private sector played in adapting to this pandemic very quickly when we needed those online services. What kinds of new public-private partnerships do you think have emerged from the pandemic? And can there be a greater role there for collaboration?
I think that a lot of the work that Dr. Petty in particular is working on, the idea of open source, the idea of collaboration, the idea of interconnectivity and making sure that systems talk to each other. I mean, just give you an example from the Singapore context, right? I mean, we did trace together and then we realized that, oh my gosh, there is a problem because the Apple devices won't switch them on. It's going to be running the program. All of these sort of trial and testing mechanisms were really went through the try and fail fast and fail forward approach that, I guess Silicon Valley and the startup culture really has. And I think that that's something which can be encouraged and should and can continue. I think that it's pretty exciting to see new solutions being put into place. I'm looking forward to seeing what the government service has to offer to us. I do know that NHB, I really like museums, etc. So I do know that a lot of the new features have been coming up, like the AI and VR and what have you. I think that a lot of collaborations can be done because my mind just is moving in a lot of different directions right now, because I think there's so many opportunities for collaboration, not necessarily just with cloud, but the cloud applications as well. And I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, we don't really know where the collaborations can happen, but I'm really excited to see that some of these conversations have started. Because as you know, despite the fact that we are now sort of distant from each other, but I think that connection and that networks that we've built in between the private and the public sector, those are going to be core to the collaborations and the innovation that's going to happen in the next lab.
And you also talked about a growing digital divide that's been exposed from the pandemic. Could you tell us a little about particularly what you're seeing in other countries and developing countries across the region, and how they're tackling that?
I think that the question right now is a couple of things. Number one, right now, how are you teaching? How are children learning? But at the same time, there is that jump into the economics of it, which is, are we preparing these students, especially those that were graduating, are we preparing these students properly? Have they been equipped? They were being equipped for a world that doesn't exist anymore, by the way. So how do we actually bridge that gap with these students? And I'm seeing this being exacerbated in a lot of different countries. In the first instance, internet connectivity is a problem. In Singapore, we talk about 5G. I don't even know whether they have G in the first instance in some of the other countries. countries. That's a real problem. The devices are an issue. The software is an issue. And I think that cloud computing, thank God, we do have a lot of like online tools that we can use. Chromebooks, for example, you can actually use offline, and then when you get connectivity, you can actually sync it online. So I love the fact that we are talking a lot about these new networking tools. Edge computing, for example, is another one. But we are seeing these questions come up, and I think that they do need to be answered, because if not, we're going to see an increasing divide, and we are already seeing that increasing divide for people who can go online, who can use the tools online, and who are being left behind. So how are we resolving it? There are different approaches in some of the developing countries, but to be very honest with you, I think everybody's still struggling just to keep the wheels on the car at the moment.
And Cheong, you talked about how inclusivity was an important principle for the services that you were developing at the court. And you've talked about a few different systems that you had to scale up over the last few months. Could you paint us a picture of what the vision might be for the future of courts and justice, especially with more of it being online?
Yes, thank you, Medha. I think one of the vision of the court is, of course, to allow access to justice for all, irrespective of your position in Singapore, whether you're, for example, a foreigner or a local. So we have many initiatives in that area, and I note that we are actually working a lot with Govtech, so we already benefit from Govtech's initiatives. I mean, for example, one of it is national digital identity, which is, I think, essential for any system that wants to authenticate, because any computer system has this problem of authentication the user. So if each agency or each business has to go and come up with its own authentication system, we're going to have problems, because we're going to duplicate a lot of effort. So fortunately, we have a whole of government, whole of nation, national digital identity system that now applies not only to Singaporeans with IC numbers, but even foreigners with the FIN number. So we are glad it's expanding, because by working with these partners, we can expand the reach of access to justice to all persons. I mean, not just Singaporeans, but even foreigners with FIN numbers, for example. And I echo what Mayan says regarding the digital divide as the gap, because we have people in Singapore as well who may not have the latest devices to run Zoom software, and more importantly, they may not have the appropriate background in which they have a safe place to have this conversation with the courts. Because, for example, they stay at home, but they may be living in many other people, or they may be living in a dormitory. So they do not have the privacy and the safe space in order to conduct the hearings. So this is something we also need to address. So we may be going back to the past, because long ago we had telephone booths, for example, and people use that. So we're actually piloting in state courts what basically looks like a telephone booth, where people go in and use the Zoom in this privacy of a booth. And if it succeeds, I don't see why we can't push these Zoom booths to the community, so that people don't have to wait their courts. For example, they could be in a community center, for example, and if they want to make a court hearing, they can access this Zoom booth and conduct court hearings in privacy. And they feel assured that no one is eavesdropping on them, for example, if they have to conduct it in a public place or in Starbucks. So so these are the areas we're looking at to ensure access of justice and to close what we have called the physical gap, the resource gap, as well as the knowledge gap, in order to ensure that everyone accesses.
That's incredible. Thank you, Cheong. And Mark, if I could just go to you, could you tell us a little bit about what kind of challenges we're going to see coming up in the next year or so, and how organizations can continue to adapt to that?
Well, sure. I think that we're going to see a continuation of what's happening now, in terms of, the workers are remote and the staff is managing them is remote, and so the tools need to be able to take control and to manage the devices remotely. So a lot of it is, from SolarWinds' perspective, it comes down to understanding the different performance of all the different components, so that you can correlate the issues and find out what the root cause is to solve the problem, so you can move on to the next issue. And it's because troubleshooting can take so much time as you're digging through one problem after another and trying to solve it. If something, automation can be used to help make it simpler, and that will allow you to achieve more of your objectives more quickly. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Dr. Petty, I just want to go back to you. You've got a fascinating role as a physician and an epidemiologist in a tech team. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned through the pandemic?
It is you do need to have a very good business process, like what everybody else has mentioned. Business process always comes first, and then followed by tech, and everything needs to work nicely together for you to deliver a good product. I think my role is mainly to look at some of the public health strategies and then try to incorporate as much of that in whatever it is that we do in terms of the products that we put out there. Yeah.
And could you tell us about how that approach has been, how you've integrated those public health strategies?
So I think usually you have a lot of different stakeholders when you're looking at public health. So you have policymakers, you have clinicians on the ground, and you also have your tech team who's trying to push new products out there. So you definitely need to have an open communication and open discussion across the board. So then you can come up with something that is not just suitable for the policymakers, but as well as the end users, also the citizens who might be benefiting from these kind of products.
Fantastic. And just back to you, Hardi, what technology are you most excited about in the work that you're doing at the moment?
I think the next thing that we're trying to do and grapple about is 5G. I think that's the next thing. That's a big thing that I think everybody's waiting. Coming up with a new iPhone, right, in next 2 months. Can I say that? Yeah.
Hopefully, it's a bit up in the air right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And we've just got a minute left on the clock. So just to go around, do a round of sort of closing remarks with everyone. If there's one thing you'd want to change tomorrow, what would it be? Mayan, could I start with you?
Like in life?
Yeah, in life and work.
Honestly, I would call for this COVID-19 thing to stop, because honestly, I just miss people in general. I think that one thing which given the fact that we are in where we are right now, I would really love for technology to be a little bit more affordable. My wish for Singapore would be universal connectivity. Like everybody should be able to connect. There are pockets of places where HDB flats are just not able to connect. I do know that so in engineering good, what we're doing is that we actually see that some blocks of flats have actually got the RCs, the residence committee centers. They do have free internet there, but because of COVID-19, we're not actually able to have the kids go down to meet there. So it's just downstairs, and it's so close and yet so far. So my wish would be for universal access to connectivity for everybody. No matter where you are, you should be able to log on to Wi-Fi at SG, man. Come on, we got to get that going. If it means that everywhere you can see a router, then so be it. 5G forever.
Absolutely. Young Cheong, what about you?
I think my wish is best. Is in relation to my second hand as Chief Data Officer. I'd like to see the better use of data to help all core users and basically everyone in Singapore. I think we are only at the starting point of how to use and harness big data, and we want to make sure that we do it for the good of
Dr.
people.
Petty?
Postman is primarily a communication tool. So what we really want to help the agencies is that for them to maybe see the value of crafting language in a way that is more approachable and without losing the legitimacy. Since we see a lot of content that's putting out there, but we're in the age where everybody's fighting for attention. So having well-crafted messages coming from the government will make citizens not feel as stressed about COVID-19 and transition a bit better. And that's all we want in terms of having a good communication product. So it's not just the product itself, but the content and everything comes nicely together.
That's wonderful. Mark?
So I would just say that when the consumers get to the tools and the technology and to solve their problems, that it works. I mean, that's what we strive for, is to make it simplified so that people, reduces the complexity, and that the tools actually work, and you get the response that you're looking for, and you go on with your life. That's what we're all about. Get outside and breathe some fresh air, right?
Absolutely. Hardi, any final thoughts?
No, I think the digital experience is something that's very new, and I think everybody's going to enjoy doing that over at least the next 12 months as we start to learn new stuff and also experience more.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for such an exciting conversation. Head on over to our Facebook or our YouTube pages for our final sessions for the festival this afternoon on understanding complexity and pivoting in a pandemic. Thank you and have a good day ahead.
Thanks, everyone.